Hey, you're not going to believe the interview we just had with Mike Durant, author of In the Company of Heroes, the pilot who was shot down in Black Hawk Down. He became a national icon, an international icon really, as images of him being held captive in Somalia were transmitted around the world. The way he tells his story, though, is as amazing as his story. So sit back, enjoy your time, hear about things that you're going to think about for the rest of your life after this discussion we're going to have with Mike Durant on the Just Right podcast. Yeah, let's do a show.
1, 2, 3, hey!
Hey, Mike Durant, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'm honored to have you. And listen, I'm going to run through just a quick intro of who you are so folks know who I got sitting across from me. All
Sure.
right? Some of this is going to be unpacked in more detail, but I know for a fact you were born in New Hampshire, but you call Alabama home, have for a number of years. 22 years active military. First enlisted, I think, in 79?
You got it.
Weren't you a Spanish linguist?
I was.
Yeah.
And don't ask me to speak Spanish. They taught us to, the school that I went to, the focus was to just be able to understand it, not speak it. So I can still understand a little bit, but I'm not a very good speaker.
Did some intercept work down there in Panama, right?
I did.
Yeah. I got family ties there. My grandfather was post commander. It was at Corzal, I think it was one of the years ago. Became a warrant officer in '83, which I still don't understand the warrant officer mafia. I never knew whether you guys got saluted or what was going on with that. But anyway, warrant officer in '83, flight school, Fort Rucker. 5 years later, you were selected for the elite 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, which we're going to talk about in a lot of detail. 3 distinguished flying crosses, Bronze Star with a V device, Purple Heart, and fairly rare in modern times, a Prisoner of War medal. And then you retired as a CW4, am I right? Chief Warrant Officer 4?
That's correct. 2 DFCs.
2 DSCs.
Yeah.
Well, okay, just 2. Got your undergrad and your master's from Embry-Riddle, is that right?
That's correct.
And built a successful defense contracting firm, Pinnacle Solutions, which you've retired from now. And you're married, and most importantly, you've had 6 kids.
We do.
Got your own basketball team.
Yeah, with some bench. Yeah.
Well, good enough. Well, hey, thanks for being on the Just Right podcast. Appreciate you.
Again, my pleasure. I do always enjoy time spent with you. I think, we certainly have some common history, and you get it. And it's kind of nice to talk to people who get it, because when you talk to people who don't get it, it's a little bit frustrating, and you got to get drilled down into areas you feel like it's tedious, but with you, that's not the case.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Thank you very much. And we'll have to make sure we don't slip into acronyms or something like that.
Well, that is easy to do, and then you can lose a lot of folks that way. But I've gotten pretty good at trying to avoid that.
Well, let me ask you this. I want folks to get to know who you are as much as your story, because your story is amazing. I've got your book sitting right here in the Company of Heroes. I read it years ago, and I've had a copy on my shelf. In fact, I think I told you before the show, my son nabbed it. He's stationed down at Benning, so he's got it with him, so I had to get another copy for today. But let me ask you, how did it start with you in the military? You're a kid in New Hampshire. Why the military? I mean, what happened there that said, that's where I want to lead my life?
So, I characterize myself as a blue-collar kid. I mean, working parents, we were certainly not poor, but we weren't really well off either, and never saw myself as necessarily college material. I did fairly well in school when I tried, but I wasn't necessarily motivated to go to college. And I lived in a paper mill town, and a lot of people went to work in the mill. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need people to do that. That's, if that's what you want to do. But I just couldn't see myself doing that for the rest of my life. And when I was about 14, and it's about the time you start thinking about, what am I going to do when I get out of college? Doesn't keep you up at night, but, you start pondering that kind of stuff. I had a major turning point in my life. I went on a helicopter flight with a friend of the family.
No kidding.
His name is Joe Brigham. He was a warrant officer in the National Guard. He also had his own business. And as I found out later, I wasn't the only young teenager that he ever did this with. He took a few of us up that he wanted to try to inspire, and it absolutely impacted me. I mean,
No kidding.
we're flying over Mount Washington, which is the highest mountain in the Northeast. It's 6,280 feet. We're basically hovering the aircraft was kind of primitive by today's standards. I guess I would say is kind of a glass bubble. If you remember the MASH helicopters, similar to that, and it's like you're just floating in space. And I'm looking at like, you know, again, I'd flown on a small airplane before, but never anything like this experience. And I said, you could actually do this as a job? And he says, yeah. And he said, you could, if you join the Army, they'll send you to flight training and you could do this as a career. And I'm like, okay, if this is a possibility for me, yeah, I'll take it. And ultimately, when I got old enough, I went and talked to the recruiter. And you probably heard the joke, you know a recruiter's line because their lips are moving. They have a quota. They're trying to fill certain slots.
Sure.
And there are programs that are available sometimes, and sometimes they're not. And he told me, sorry, but flight school program's not available for people coming right in off the street. You're going to have to join the military first, and then you can apply for flight school afterwards, which is all correct. But I didn't really know whether he was telling me the truth about, could I have applied to go directly to flight school? But either way, and another smart thing I did, and I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I have made some good decisions along the way, is I spoke to someone else about joining the military. And I think you and Jared had talked about this, or he did. And you don't want to just go join the military, right? There has to be a purpose to it. I mean, serving the country is noble and it's great, and we need people to do that. But for you as an individual, you should also be thinking about, what can I do with this in the life after the military?
Sure, absolutely.
And I was offered to go to, as we discussed before we got on camera, the Spanish language school in Monterey, California, to be in military intelligence. And how marketable is that? I don't know. But, I was convinced that, well, they'll send me to school for a year to learn Spanish. I'll be a military intelligence analyst. That's probably something
sounds sexy.
Worth something, yeah. and then I can possibly apply for flight school. Okay, we'll go ahead and sign this. And it was one of those cases where I had gone off to talk to the recruiter on my own, and then came back to the house. I'd already signed the paperwork. My parents had not been informed at all. And they were kind of shocked, right? But I said, I think this sounds like a pretty good deal. Let's give it a try. And then I was stunned by the reality of basic training. I just,
no kidding.
I wasn't mentally prepared for it. I just wasn't.
But who really is?
Yeah, I guess no one is.
That's back when drill sergeants could be drill sergeants.
Yes, I mean it was quite a lifestyle change, is all I could say.
Yeah.
I mean, you're living in an open barracks with 20 guys that you've never met before from all over the country. They treat by design. They treat you like crap, right? I mean, it's probably not as bad as some of the other military training that goes on, but it's going from a high school kid with long hair and concert T-shirts on and didn't care about anything except girls and some sports. This is a radical lifestyle change. And I at that point was thinking, I have made a mistake. This is not what I thought it was going to be. And I don't know what I did think it was going to be, but it certainly shocked me to the point where I was thinking about, I don't know if I can get out of this, but if I can, I need to.
Well, was there anybody in your life, like you had this warrant officer from the Guard who gave you the flight in the helicopter, but did you have any military in your family? I mean, was there anything watching it as you grew up? Like, my family's been generational Army, so my son watched 3 generations before him do stuff, and then he wanted to do it.
Right.
But did you have anything like that?
They were in the Guard. My uncles were in the Guard. My father was in the Guard. But to me, that's different. I mean, you just sort of see him, go once a month. Not that the Guard isn't a great, organization, but it's just,
it wasn't a full life.
Right. And, you still live at home. Unless you get deployed, obviously. But I wasn't prepared. And I was, again, to the point where if I could get out of this, I need to, and was convinced that I should stay by the drill sergeant. And I did. And at that point got super motivated. I got the PT award, physical training award of the whole class in basic training. I scored the highest, and, just really got motivated that, okay, if I am going to do this, I'm going to do the best job that I possibly can. And then I went on to language school, advanced individual training, where they teach you how to actually do what you're on contract to do. And then I went to Panama, and that's where my assignment was. And I'm a whatever at that point, probably an E3 enlisted private, and working in military intelligence unit, and coincidentally, run across Manuel Noriega in the parking lot.
In the parking lot
of our, because he was an
was
MI
there a food
guy.
truck, and y'all were standing in line together, or what?
No, but he was a military intelligence guy. So
Oh,
I was in a military intelligence unit, and at the time, he's only probably a major or whatever, but he was already pretty well known, and he showed up, and he obviously very easy individual to identify.
You were there later,
And then
saw him
years
again,
later, we
yeah.
go back and bag him. But anyway, so I'm kind of enjoying this military intelligence job. And then one day I'm sitting on the beach, and I know this is a really long answer to your original question, but I'm sitting on the beach, and these 3 Hueys fly low level right over the top of us with shooters in the back and their legs out the door. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot how much I really want to do that. And so it sort of re-energized me. I applied for flight school, and I got in. Had I not gotten into flight school, I probably would have separated from the military, because I did like it, but I felt like there was something more. But getting to flight school was then a game changer.
All right, so you got to flight school. So warrant officer candidate, become a warrant officer. What, W01, I guess. Go to flight school as a W01.
No, what's different today is that you actually get commissioned as a W1 pretty early in the pipeline. Back then, you didn't get it until you were done flight school. So you go through as a warrant officer candidate. And what it does is it changes your date of rank, is what it really does. I mean, you're still treated like you're an idiot, whether you're a W1 or not. But your data rank changes. Yeah.
You guys, I made the joke earlier about the warrant officer mafia.
Yeah.
Y'all are as warrant officers, you're technicians, you're technical specialists. You have niche, basically skills and knowledge, but you're also this kind of in between that folks who are junior in rank or junior as officers always look at you like, I don't know what to do with you right now.
Right.
Can I tell you what to do? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And but y'all kind of ride in the middle a lot of times, it seems like.
And we're the ones that keep everything running.
And you are the ones that keep everything running.
Yeah.
There's the backbone of the Army and the NCO Corps, and then there's y'all that keep things running.
Right.
But all right, so you became a warrant officer. You went to flight school down at Fort Rucker, which is now called Fort Rucker again soon, it looks like.
Yeah.
But coming up, and we were talking about your raisings, so to speak, up there in New Hampshire. We're going to go forward into your story here in a few minutes. But what about being raised, where you were, who you were with, whatever else? What do you think instilled things in you that you wound up needing later on? Like, was it sports? Was it family? Was it faith? What did you see in your life that you looked later on like, I'm glad I had that because it built me up?
Yeah, faith is certainly part of it. Now, my faith journey had its ups and downs, and the lowest point probably being post Somalia, when looking back at what happened there, based on what we were trying to do, it could, in my mind, there was no justification for the horrors that occurred there, and I couldn't accept it, because it was horrible. I mean, there's not a lot of things I've witnessed that were as bad as what happened there, and we were there for all the right reasons. So anyway, but faith is certainly part of who I am, and it's come full circle. I think playing sports helped a lot too.
Was it hockey?
I played hockey. I played football. I mean, I wasn't great, but I played, and you learn about working and teamwork and your role in the organization to make the overall team a success. And those things to me are invaluable if you can learn them when you're young. So I think a combination of all those things.
Good enough. It's amazing sometimes what we draw on later. You don't even realize you've got it now. I can remember things as a kid that I didn't know that I grumbled about, and then later on you realize that instilled something.
Yeah.
So you went on to do some pretty amazing stuff. So in the world of aviation, Army aviation, the 160th, which you're wearing the shirt right now.
I am wearing the shirt.
You are wearing the shirt.
By design.
Night Stalkers. So the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I remember when I first got in, we called them Task Force 160.
Right.
But you guys were the premier Special Operations rotary wing guys. And how did you? I've never heard what is like. I know what selection is like to go to Ranger School. I know what selection is like to go to the Q course for Special Forces. But there's a selection process to go to the 160th. Am I right?
No, yeah. It's very similar, actually.
All right. So tell me about that.
So when I first found out about the unit, I was in Korea. And at the time, it was still what we call a black organization, meaning nobody publicly acknowledged that it existed because it had just been formed in the aftermath of the attempted rescue of the Iranian hostages.
Right.
That's why the unit was created, because the analysis indicated that, look, you can't just throw together a bunch of assets and go try to do a complicated mission like this. It's not going to work. And so they created the unit. And there was going to be a second attempt, but most people don't know that. But the unit started training, long-range missions in the desert, all the things that were required to go prosecute that target. And we're pretty much getting to the point where they were ready to go, and then the hostages got released. But the smartest decision maybe ever made by our government was, okay, well, the hostages are released, but we still need this capability. So let's keep the organization intact, fund it, obviously because everything runs on funding, unfortunately. And today, I mean, it's just an amazing organization. It's gotten more amazing over the years. So when I found out about it, it was, like I said, it was still black. And it's like people whispered about it in bars, and it's like, wow, I read Tom Clancy books. That sounds really cool, And I was getting assigned to Fort Campbell, which is where the headquarters for the 160th is. So I'm thinking, all right, I go to Fort Campbell, I walk across the street, knock on the door, say, hey, I'm interested, what do I need to do? And I made the mistake of signing into the 101st Airborne Division before I went and talked to the 160th. And by doing that, committed me to 2 years in the 101st. But in the end, best thing that could have happened to me.
Got a lot of stick time doing that.
I did get a lot of stick time, and in Korea, I'd flown medevac. And medevac is, there's great experience. You got to make a lot of decisions on the fly, quick response, bad weather, and you're flying by yourself. I was 22 years old. I'm flying real-world medevac missions, as the pilot in command.
No kidding. Yeah.
You mature fast or you die. Yeah. That's basically how it works.
And others die with you, yeah.
Yeah, and that was great experience. But what I didn't have is multi-ship, meaning like formation flying, not a lot of, I had a decent amount of night vision goggle time, but not a ton. And you really need a lot of night vision goggle time to do well at the 160th. So getting that extra 2 years on 101st really helped me out. I went to the instructor pilot school while I was in 101st. So now I'm an IP. I got much more time. I got a lot more formation flying experience.
Yeah.
And then the process begins. So the assessment, again, it's a volunteer organization. So everybody that goes there on the pilot side is a volunteer. And then you have to go through an assessment, a lot like some of these other special units that you're familiar with. It's a psych eval, it's a swim test, physical fitness test, flight eval, board, all that stuff. And it happens in about a 3 or 4 day period. The board's always the most dramatic because you show up with your dress uniform on, you go in there and a bunch of people look like they want to hit you. And they ask you very difficult questions and try to put you in uncomfortable situations. And, there is no right answer. They just want to see how you answer the question, what your makeup is. And that just begins the process. So then you enter green platoon. If they decide to take you, green platoon has changed quite a bit, but by the time you start to end, it's about 10 months. Where you're going through, again, land navigation, life-saving, physical fitness, just, all the things that, soldiering in general require at a high level. And then you start basic nav, where you're navigating in the cockpit with a map and a compass. Because even today, I think the priority is, hey, look, you need to know how to navigate, even though you got multiple systems in the aircraft that'll get you there.
That's right.
When I was first in, GPS wasn't even in the aircraft yet.
Not at all.
The global positioning system, I'm assuming everybody knows what that is. But so we really did rely on a paper map and a compass. But you have to hit targets in the middle of nowhere at night with very limited resources, and be able to do it every time plus or minus 30 seconds. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Depending on where you're trying to go, that can be a pretty difficult task.
I can just tell you it's hard doing it on the ground.
Yeah.
Of course, you guys have a different terrain markers from up there, but you're also flying by it a lot faster, so you're having to keep
You
track
can
with
miss
the
it
terrain.
pretty
Yeah,
quickly. Yeah.
exactly.
So it starts with the planning process. You got to pick the right checkpoints, in order to help you find your way. And then you learn the aircraft systems, because the aircraft have different systems than the conventional force does. So you got to learn how all that works. Then you got to learn the special tactics, like things like fast rope maneuvers and aerial refueling now.
I was going to ask about that.
All of that stuff is all unique to the unit. So you have to learn all that and demonstrate proficiency.
Was
Ship
Blackhawk
landing.
your airframe at the time too, right away?
Well, it was for me. It's different now because it's a pretty expensive aircraft to fly to put all those hours on it. So now they actually start out in little birds, which are the Hughes 500s, basically, for all that basic nav stuff, and then they move to the advanced aircraft.
Okay.
So again, all that takes about 10 months. And then again, kind of like Jared said, then you arrive at the unit and you're still nobody, because you're the FNG, basically, if anybody knows what that acronym stands for.
It's the one we won't say, but yeah.
There are people that won't even talk to you. You have not proven yourself. You just because you got through Green Platoon means nothing, right? You have to then make your way through the progression, basic mission qualified, full mission qualified, and then the ultimate level is flight lead.
And I'm assuming Green Platoon actually weeds people out too.
Oh, yeah.
So you have some that are there and they're not there the next day.
Oh, you lose people in assessment. You lose people in all phases of Green Platoon. And then you lose some people once they get to the unit, because either the deployment schedule is too much for them, or they just aren't performing the way you thought they were going to perform, even though they got through all that. When the rubber actually meets the road, sometimes it doesn't work out.
Was it of any benefit to you at all that you had your Spanish language skills that were already there?
No, probably
in some special
not.
operations, they want a language skill to be attached to it, but is that necessary at all in aviation?
No, not really. Right. No, I think in that case, it probably didn't help me a whole lot. The more you know about the more things, it's obviously going to help you in life, but I can't think of a specific example where that helped me out.
So you guys, you said you had some flying with nods and night vision ahead of your time going to Green Platoon and getting into the 160th, but you guys fly with it a lot when you're in the 160th, right? Is that one of the things that differentiates the 160th's capabilities, aside from the airframe having some other capabilities too? But is flying with nods a big part of what y'all do?
Yeah, certainly at the time. I would say now there's maybe the focus is broader. Across the entire military.
Yeah.
But the unit was pioneers in night vision goggle flight. Our guys were the ones that came up with the idea. When I went through flight school, we actually flew with what are called full face goggles, meaning they have a frame around them where you cannot see anything other than what you see through the tubes. And we did flights during the daytime with filters on the ends of the tubes where the instructor can see, but you can't, because obviously that's the safest way to learn how to fly night vision goggles. But it's really difficult for the person actually flying under those conditions. I think I was actually the last class to ever fly full face goggles and do day filters. I'm not sure, but we made a transition right around that time. But it was guys at the unit who said, "This is stupid. Cut the frame off," right? Because they're originally made for ground use, not air use.
Yeah.
So they cut the frame off and they made them flip up, and there's been evolution after evolution.
They got the big cushion pad around.
Yeah,
and they're like
the full
like
face
this big.
ones. Yeah. They didn't last very long, but that's where it started. Until somebody said, "No, we need to change this." And then they came up with ideas like finger lights and lip lights and infrared lasers and infrared tracers and all these things that you can see with night vision goggles that you can't see with the unaided eye. All were, basically came from that early.
So how much of that training is done by simulators now? Do they do that?
A lot.
Simulation?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
Simulators are really good. It was actually part of what I did after,
Pinnacle.
I transitioned out, was working that field. And it's a tremendous cost saver in safety. You can do things in a simulator that are sometimes impossible to do in the aircraft, but certainly safer to do in a simulator, and you can do it cost effectively. Because a lot of what's going on in the aircraft today that are advanced is mission management. It's not so much moving the sticks around, it's pushing buttons and understanding how to use the integrated avionics. And you don't need to learn how to do that in a aircraft that costs whatever, $10,000 an hour to fly. Now, I'm not saying you don't need stick time. Okay, that's the trap that some bean counters tend to fall into. That
There's always that seat of the pants feel that changes things.
and actually the Army has come to realize that the aircraft they've been using for primary flight training at Fort Rucker now probably isn't the best because you're not doing enough actual stick flying. There's a lot of automated systems on board that help the aircraft or help you as a pilot, that you're losing that real ability to fly manually.
Yeah.
And they just did a pilot program where they're going to probably change how flight school is done because there's been a realization that we got people that don't know how to fly a helicopter. I mean, they can mission manage all day long, but if they have to actually fly a bird, they're not as good as we used to be, unfortunately.
So let me ask you this: what now? The 160th, y'all are balls out a lot. So when you're flying, some of the stuff you're doing are not the things you would do or even be allowed to do in a conventional unit. But then you're also, like you said, you were back in the days when things were being pioneered. And I swear, I think it was you told me one time about strapping a Gatling gun or something to the front of one of the birds just to try it out to see if it would work. And it didn't work very well.
Am I
right in remembering that?
Yeah, I was part of the group that created the ARM Blackhawk.
Okay.
And it's still the only place that it's used is at the 160.
All right.
And yeah, we were running with scissors. I mean, we put a 50 cal, and these things are being mounted just on what was originally intended to be a door gunner pintle mount. So it's not really structurally designed to hold, a fixed forward weapon, but we modified it to where it could. And I mean, we
had
duct
tape, a little zip tie.
Oh, plenty of duct tape. Yeah, even coat hangers. I mean, you name it, whatever it took. But it was an amazing time to be there because you could go from sitting in the team room saying, "Man, it would be cool if we could do this," to convincing the leadership that there's some risk here, but we think we can mitigate it. Let's go try it. To then, that worked, writing a requirement and actually getting it turned into something that is fielded and then go shoot it in combat. I mean, there's probably nowhere else in the world you could say that. And I experienced that on more than one occasion.
So what was the craziest thing you can remember y'all did and thought, "Man, we're never going to do that again"? The one that you sit around at 160th reunions going, "Remember that time?"
Yeah. Well, one of the most amazing stories, and I've told it many times. I like to joke that I shot myself down 5 times. And the most dramatic one, and none of it my fault, but the most dramatic one. So back to this pintle mount with a minigun on it. So a minigun is a 7.62 Gatling gun,
right.
6-barrel. It'll shoot 6,000 rounds a minute at high rate. Okay, that is incredible. When people see video, like if you go online, you Google minigun, night firing, keep in mind all those traces you're seeing, that's every 14th round. Okay, or every 15th round. It's 14 to 1 tracer mix usually. So even though it's a steady stream of tracers, there's 14 more rounds in between each one of those you're not seeing. That's how many rounds are going downrange. So we got one on each side. And the way that we fixed forward mounted them is we put this, we called it a diaper pin. It was a pin that went through the pivot, which, because, if it's a door gunner, they're going to want to be able to pivot it, right?
Right.
We have to fix that. So we put a brace to hold it vertically, and then we put this pin through the shaft it's rotating on to hold it horizontally. And then it's a diaper pin because it goes around and it has a hook on the end that connects on the end.
Okay,
right?
all right.
Which sounds like that should be sufficient. Well, it is until it isn't. And I'm flying with Donovan Briley, who's a really good friend of mine, lost in Somalia, actually. First aircraft shot down. We're flying. He's in the right seat. I'm in the left. Night vision goggles. We're going in a range at Fort Knox. Live fire. No dry run. We got approval to usually have to make a dry pass to make sure there's nobody out there, but we got approval to go in hot. So we roll in. I'm flying. I pull the trigger, and the tracers are crossing in front of the nose. And so I let off. That's
bad, by the way.
Yeah, I let off
Don't
on the
cross
trigger.
The streams.
And I said, that is the worst expletive bore sight job I have ever seen in my life. So a bore sight is when you orient the weapons to where they're going to impact where the sight is pointing, right? And Donovan, in classic Donovan style, says, "Mike, I think we got a problem." So I look over, and I mentioned the finger lights earlier. Finger light is just a little battery operated LED that is infrared, so you can't see it unless you're wearing goggles. We have some that you can see. This one you could see. And he turns on his finger light and he points to the windshield. His minigun, that diaper pin can't come out while we were flying to Fort Knox. And when I pulled the trigger, the barrel rotation caused the gun to go left. You would think the wind would cause it to go right, but the barrel rotation caused it to go left.
Force.
And it shot through the cockpit. It missed his knee by like 3 inches. He's got 7.62 rounds all through the cockpit. The windshield's blown out. Glass has been, because I felt something in my eyes, and it turned out it was glass shards from the rounds going through the cockpit.
Mighty Mike.
And again, luckily, it hit. He had a armor panel on the side here, and the barrels hit the front of the armor panel, I think, but it stopped them from going any further, or it would come right through the cockpit and kill us both. And anyway, we landed, and what I like to say about this story is, this is back when it seemed like we had a little bit of authority to do things that maybe you'd get crushed for today. So I'm thinking about, okay, nowhere in the manual does it say I can't have holes in the windshield to fly this bird. So we put duct tape, back to the duct tape, over the holes in the windshield, cranked it up, and flew it back to Fort Campbell.
No,
today that would probably get you
with your finger off the trigger the whole time.
we emptied the rounds out of the weapons, but that's probably the most dramatic thing that ever happened non-combat.
Yeah,
that I can come up with, and then there were 4 more of those that are less exciting. But
no, that's but yeah, that's definitely one of those you swap over a beer and like, oh, no, let me tell you the time we shot ourselves down.
Yeah,
that's
so they don't use the diaper pins anymore. By the way.
All right, so op tempo for you, you're in the 160th. Operational tempo is higher than the average unit, I would imagine, but it's a lot of come and go. What's the op tempo like in the 160th?
Nonstop.
Yeah.
Again, I was out when 9/11 occurred. I'd retired 6 months prior.
Really?
Made me feel like I was sitting on the bench and considered what I could do to get back in. But with my injuries from Somalia, I couldn't fly operationally anymore. But the reason I bring that up is just to put this in perspective. The rotation for our guys during the War on Terror was 90 days on, 90 days off. So you're in theater 90 days, either Iraq or Afghanistan, you're back for 90, then back in. There are guys who did 30 rotations, 30 in combat. And when I say combat, I mean combat. Yeah. They're hitting multiple targets every night. And there's just no op tempo that's more demanding than that I know of.
That's every one of the airframes.
Yes.
Chinooks, Blackhawks.
Yeah, the Chinooks were the stars of Afghanistan, actually, because of the elevation, which was a real struggle for the Little Birds and even the Blackhawks. But Iraq was pretty much more a Blackhawk Little Bird show.
Yeah.
With certainly a lot of Chinook missions as well, but yeah, all the platforms.
Yeah, I was in my tour in Afghanistan was the beginning of the war, riding horses and stuff. But we were in the northern parts, north of the Hindu Kush, and so both Bagram and Kandahar down south couldn't get to us by rotary wing because getting over the top of the Hindu Kush was too much for most of the airframes they flew.
Yep.
And the only couple of times something happened where somebody came in from the south, I think they were flying Chinooks.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah,
because it's a beast. I mean, it really is. It's a
freaking school bus with rotors on top.
Yeah, we call it a dump truck, but I love it. Yeah, it's a great aircraft.
But I've seen images of, some of those guys that fly in the Chinooks. It's amazing. They can balance on a dime. But they literally, one guy was with the ramp down in the back was hovering in the air, exiting troops onto a mud hut on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, there's a famous picture from Afghanistan. That's probably it.
Yeah.
The front wheels are off in space, with hundreds of feet below. Yeah.
So you had some major deployments. Operation Prime Chance, which a lot of folks don't realize is defending tankers that were flagged American and making sure they're safe.
Our friends, the Iranians, who
they're in the news again.
They've I don't even know what to say about them. It's just they've been a constant problem for 50 years.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because the Israelis are just to the point where they had to do something, and they did.
Yeah, and I think most of the world is glad they did. At the same time, holding their breath that they did.
Right.
But Operation Just Cause, so you were back in Panama again, and you went in with the 160th on that too, right?
Right. We did. We were there for 8 hours. So when the F-117 dropped the first bomb ever at Rio Hato, I was down there underneath watching it. It was pretty amazing.
Flying over places you've been to in the past, right?
Yeah. Some of the subsequent missions, there's where I used to live, and we're putting SEAL Team 6 in on targets around the city, trying to find, because Noriega was still on the run at the time. That our mission was to capture him. That was it.
Yeah.
And we called it the hunt for Elvis, because there was always an Elvis sighting somewhere, and usually it was bogus, but if it met the intel criteria, we'd go. And so we were flying all over the place.
And then Desert Storm also, also with 160th. Obviously, all your deployments there with 160th. But what was the mission in Desert Storm? Was it scud hunting or what?
It was, yeah. So the scuds, for those who don't recall, the concern was Saddam was launching scuds into Israel,
right,
which potentially would draw Israel into the fight, which would break up our coalition, because our coalition had Arab countries along with Western countries as part of a unified force. But if the Israelis got involved, the concern was that would fall apart. So it was a huge issue to stop Saddam Hussein from firing scuds into Israel. So we were putting Delta Force on the ground in Western Iraq to try to find these launchers. And then we actually found some ourselves, and I was fortunate enough to put the first rounds on one.
Did you really?
I did, yeah.
With an armed Blackhawk?
With an armed Blackhawk.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Take it out?
So in the end, they think it was a decoy. But there's a photo of it in this. I don't know if you've ever seen these books. Like there's an Army one, a Navy one, Air Force. There's a SOCOM book. They're big format, like coffee table books. Yeah. In that book for SOCOM, there's a picture of my FLIR. If you look at that picture, I don't care who you are, you're not going to think that's a decoy. I mean, so FLIR is forward-looking infrared. For those who don't know what that acronym is, it's heat sensitive, basically. You can see heat on the wheels. I mean, it looks real. I mean, this thing absolutely looks real. And then you can see the minigun rounds sort of hitting on the way up into but it didn't blow up. And we had a Scud expert back at the operations center when we got back, and he said, "You're really lucky it didn't blow up, because if it blows up, it's like the space shuttle going off, because there's so much propellant in there."
Oh, wow.
And we were pretty close. We were probably within 200 meters when we broke.
Oh, wow.
Break meaning you're diving, you're shooting, and then you break. And he said if you would have blown it up, it probably would have taken you out. So, okay.
Glad it take that all day long. Yeah. You still get credit though, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
And then there's Operation Gothic Serpent, which is heading into Somalia. Became known as the Battle of Mogadishu. A lot of your book, of course, and rightfully so, is focused on that mission. I want to dive into that for a bit, because that's the one. I mean, your situation in the Battle of Mogadishu took you out of running in obscurity in terms of your personal name, and thrust you into the eyes of the entire world. And I remember that. I remember when that happened. It was amazing to see it. But for those who don't recall, Operation Gothic Serpent, the intro into Mogadishu for the United States actually started under George H.W. Bush.
Correct.
But it transitioned in early '93 when Clinton took office.
Correct.
So you were there during Clinton's era, correct?
Yes.
All right. So Clinton took office in January '93. Task Force Ranger is the name of the U.S. presence, I guess, at the airfield there. And then in October, was it October 3rd, I think? October 3rd, '93, launched what many people just refer to as Black Hawk Down, because that's the book and the movie. And I guess code word Irene was what launched the mission, right?
It was.
Which my secretary downstairs at the law firm, her name is Irene. I told
really?
her one day, I said, I don't know if you're aware of the use of your name in modern pop culture. And she went, I've never heard that. So anyway,
And actually, that's my character that says it in the movie.
That is your character. Yeah. And I want to talk about the movie and all that too at some point, just to get your thoughts on it. But Rangers have the mission of going in and securing some high-value targets, or securing the scene so that Delta can secure the high-value targets. You're part of the flight in. Who were you bringing in, by the way?
So I was the flight lead, which means I'm responsible for my whole flight of aircraft of the Ranger blocking force. So it's basically split into two pieces. We had the assault force, which is where the Delta guys are. They're primarily on little birds. Yeah. And they're going to go in first because they want the element of surprise. They want to be, busting doors down before, with limited amount of time to react, right? If you put the blocking force in first, then you bring the assault force in, the bad guys have a little bit more time to react. So they're going in first. We're right behind them. So as soon as their birds pull out, we're moving in. And I had 4 Blackhawks that made up the blocking force, plus 2 spare attack little birds, plus the search and rescue birds. So we're all coming in together on the second wave, basically. And we just set up a box. I mean, all they want is put a Ranger platoon on each corner, and the purpose is twofold. One, keep more bad guys from getting in, and then obviously we call them leakers, keeping the people you're after from getting out. And that all went pretty smoothly, even though we'd done it 6 times before. This was the 7th mission.
Right.
And, we had tremendous success. We had captured, I think, 27 people on a list of 50, taken no casualties of any significance. We didn't lose any birds. I mean, it was all going pretty well. There were 3-day missions and 3-night missions leading up to that. And this 7th mission is a day mission, which created some risk factors that we knew about, but, not my call.
Part of the job.
But yeah, the commander makes the call.
Right.
They're within tolerance, I guess you could say, and when we go, and then all hell broke loose.
Yeah, it got crazy on the ground pretty quick, didn't it?
It did.
I know we had one Ranger injured on the fast rope end, and that created a scene. And then I guess the all call went out, and it seemed like everybody in Mogadishu had an AK-47, and they all ran to the scene.
And that was their strategy, which we found out later. They actually had set up a system where once they knew where we were hitting the target, and again, they learned this over time, right? When I talk about this, I try to compare it to sports, right? If you keep running the same play, the defense is going to adapt to that play, right? They understand, okay, this formation means this is what they're going to do, so here's how we counter that. It works the same way in the military. And so having done it 6 times, they obviously understood, okay, the helicopters all go to a target. That's where, they're going to put people on the ground. They're going to try to apprehend folks. If we can pin them in there, then, we might have some chance of
Plus, they were blocking roads, so the ground convoy was having trouble.
Yep. So we found out after that was their strategy. Once they knew where the target was, they were all going to close on it, and it worked pretty well, actually.
Well, the Blackhawk stayed on station. In fact, one thing I've never known is what was the purpose of y'all? If there's going to be a ground convoy for the exfil, what was the purpose of y'all remaining on station like you did?
So we kept 2 attack little birds and 2 Blackhawks over the target for fire support. So the little birds, they've got miniguns and rockets,
right?
And they're going to be slightly further out in terms of their restricted fire areas. Where the Blackhawks were being used, and honestly, hindsight being 2020, it wasn't a great way to do this, and it's not being done anymore, at least not in urban environments. They were being used for both the miniguns, which I don't think they used the miniguns a lot, but they had snipers on board. So it's a great stable platform for the shooter, but it's a 50-something foot long target for people on the ground that have weapons. Mm-hmm. And you can't fly fast, because if you're flying fast, your shooter can't hit anything. So the speed is less than what you would fly if you were, just trying to avoid fire. We're probably flying 50 knots, right? Which may seem fast to someone on the ground, but that's really slow for an aircraft. Mm-hmm. And it makes the aircraft much more vulnerable to ground fire.
And how far above ground were you?
Very low. I mean, the Blackhawks had to stay 150 feet and below. Okay. And the little birds, I think, were 300 feet and above, which worked out great. I mean, we'd done it, at that point, probably 50 times, counting rehearsals, and never had any close calls in terms of mid-airs.
Were you just flying racetracks?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we had, when I was in Baghdad in 04, I can remember being on a cordon and search mission in Sadr City area, and they had changed all the TTPs because the racetracks got predictable, apparently, for ground fire, and so they were flying figure eights, and they were also altitude changes, and they had gone through all kinds of machinations to try and make sure the bad guys on the ground didn't have a predictable means of assessing, where the flight was going to be.
Right. Now, my flight, because I'm not one of these 4 aircraft over the target. I've already gone in and I put my guys on the ground, but I took my flight north of the city for exactly what you're talking about. And one of the guys criticized me. He said, "Hey, we need to stay closer to the target so we can see what's going on." And I'm like, "No, we're a contingency force at this point. I'm going north of the city where there's no threat. Because if we're just doing circles up there, why would I want to be right here in the middle of this fight and put our entire flight at risk?" And it was obviously the right decision to do what I decided to do. So I've got my flight and I'm north of the city. Now, north of the city is not a long distance. It's probably a mile.
Right.
And we're up there orbiting basically on standby. I mean, when you got assets like that, if you could keep them on hand as a ground force, keep them on hand, right? Because you never know when you might need some kind of helo support. And then I get called back in when the first Blackhawk gets shot down.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So you were flying what, Super 6-4?
Right.
And Super 6-1, your friend Donovan, right?
Right.
So he's the first one to go down.
And Cliff Walcott.
Yeah, and Cliff Walcott. And then you were, I think you were directed in to replace him.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, we didn't have a sniper on board. So we're going in simply to use our minigun down close to try to provide fire support for the guys on the ground. That's what our mission has now become, which that was not our mission prior to that. But again, you adapt and you do what needs to be done to try to help the force that you're supporting.
And you've got a full crew?
4, yeah. 2 crew chiefs and 2 pilots.
All right, so Super 6-1 is down. What do you remember about Super 6-1, hearing it over the air, and recognizing that one of them's already down?
Yeah, I mean, I've always called myself an eternal optimist. It never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that Cliff and Donovan would be dead. I just assumed that, they took a round, they're going down, they're going to land the aircraft somewhere, we'll get them recovered, and we'll all go debrief this thing when this is over. But obviously now we've lost a bird, which is the first time that this happens for us. There had been another Blackhawk shot down by 10th Mountain Division previously with some fatalities, but it wasn't our unit. And it, I've always used the phrase "big sky, little bullet." You don't think it can necessarily happen to you until there's enough volume of fire where it's going to happen to you. And there's also a search and rescue bird shot down in the middle of all this that then heightens that even more, because now they've shot down 2 aircraft in about 5 minutes, and we're going into this fray. This is getting real, really fast. And, I remember telling the crew chiefs, because I've got control of their guns from up front. So I've got an arming switch. And I armed the guns, and I said, "Okay, you're armed, but we got friendlies all over the ground down here. So we can't go in here just blasting away. When we see bad guys, we got to get situationally aware so we know where all of our forces are before you start launching 6,000 rounds a minute downrange."
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in an urban environment, I don't want to say it's impossible, but right on the rooftops, it's really difficult to sort all that out. Because first of all, they're all taking cover. So, they're not standing out there waving at you. They're all taking cover. So trying to figure out where everybody was would have probably taken us a while. In the end, we only made it around 3 times when we got nailed by an RPG.
So RPG to the tail rotor, right?
Right.
In the movie, and later I want to get your thoughts on the movie, like I said, but in the movie, there's a scene where you took the RPG to the tail rotor, but initially you thought it was going to be okay until you started getting some play in the pedals and stuff like that. So what were your first thoughts, and how did that I mean?
Well, I knew we were hit, and I always tell people, if you want to know what it feels like, drive too fast in a parking lot and hit a speed bump. That's what it felt like. It felt like a jolt to the airframe, because you don't see it. Usually what they were doing is they let us fly by, and then they emerge from the doorway and shoot. So you're probably not going to see the launch. The crew chief might see it, depending if they're looking in the right direction. And then the reason they hit both of us in the tail is they're not leading us enough. So that 50-knot magical speed was just ballistically perfect for them to shoot at the. I'm sure they were aiming for center mass.
Which the crazy thing is, an RPG is not usually designed to take out aircraft.
No,
I mean,
but if you fire enough of them, eventually, they say they fired 150 at us on that mission. Now, not just at me, but
no kidding.
on that mission. That's how many RPGs.
I never heard
fired.
that. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, they went all in. They thought we want to bring down a helicopter, and they were successful. So anyway, back to your question. Initially, I feel like I hit a speed bump, knew we were hit. I can see the airfield. It's 2 miles ahead of us. And looking in the cockpit, everything's okay. Controls were all responding. But what had happened was the gearbox had been blown apart. And, it's like a transmission in your car, right? If you blow your transmission apart,
you ain't going anywhere.
Not for very long. Once
gonna
those
coast in at
gears,
that point, yeah.
once those gears, run without oil for any period of time, they're going to self-destruct, and that's what happened. And then when the tail rotor left the aircraft, again, that's impossible to describe. If you haven't experienced it, I can't describe it. I mean, it's just violent spin of the aircraft, out of control.
What do they call that? Counter rotation or something, where you're trying to restore stability?
Well, the tail rotor is there to counter the torque of the main rotor system. Again, if you think about a drill, people are familiar with that. You pull the trigger, you can feel it want to turn. That's torque. So the same thing's happening to a helicopter, obviously with a lot more force. The tail rotor is mounted horizontally to push against that force that's wanting the airframe to spin. Once that tail rotor's gone, there's nothing. So essentially, if you were left affected by anything else, what would eventually happen is the airframe, minus wind drag, obviously, would be spinning as fast as the rotor blades are in the opposite direction. Yeah. That's essentially once it reached equilibrium. That will never happen, but that's how much force you're talking about here. And I remember looking at my feet, trying to convince myself, you're doing the right thing in terms of which pedal you're pushing, but it is having no effect on the aircraft. And then I'm like, okay, we lost the tail rotor. Again, this is something you can't train that. There's no, you can't do it in a simulator. I mean, we can do a loss of tail rotor in a simulator, but you can't do the violent effects, the physical violent effects of the airframe in a simulator. But I knew what had happened, and the only thing you can do is shut the engines off, because again, that's what's creating that torque. So if you can remove that force, it'll stop that spin, but now you have no engines. Yeah. So that's not good either. Especially at low altitude, but it's what you have to do. You can't possibly maintain control of the aircraft if it's just spinning out of control. So in a Blackhawk, we don't have control of the engines on the flight controls. So the co-pilot or the non-flying pilot has to shut the engines off. So I looked over at Ray and I said, "We lost the tail. We better pull them off." And he knew he was an experienced guy. I actually had more experience than I did, and pull the engines off, but we're spinning so fast that he said, and we talked about it on the ground afterwards, typical instructor pilots, he said, we're spinning so fast, the centrifugal force was causing him to not be able to lift his arms up over his head, which is where the engine power control levers are. So he got one to idle and got one about halfway off, which slowed the spin but didn't stop it. And now, with no engine power, we're falling out of the sky like a Coke machine. And all I could do is try to keep the aircraft from flipping upside down, which, again, I don't know if anything I did made a difference, honestly, but all I can tell you is we crashed right on the wheels, and that's the only reason I'm still here.
All right, so you're on impact. Now, you said something on the ground. Did Ray make it?
Yeah,
okay.
We all survived the crash.
Okay.
The crew chiefs were hurt really bad because they don't, first of all, they don't have as good as seats, at least in that version of the aircraft. It's been improved since. And they're probably not strapped in, meaning, they operate on what we call monkey harnesses back there.
Yeah.
So they're on a strap, but they're not strapped into their seats, which have, all the crash survivability.
I use those as a jump master in Blackhawks.
Because it allows you to move around and do the things you need to do. And, you get in the seat when you have to land. well, they didn't, obviously we're not planning to land, so they're probably not strapped in, or at least not likely that they're both strapped in. So, that violent crash, they were probably not going to make it. But Ray, I mean, he was not hurt as bad as I was. And we're talking, once I regained consciousness, we're talking about what happened, and there was no reason to talk about what happened. We should have been talking about, hey, the heck, we're going to survive the next 5 minutes here. But we did, and that's when he explained what he had tried to do. And then he was able to get himself out of the cockpit. There's no way I could get out. I had a femur fracture, crushed vertebrae in my spine. It's hard to get out of a Blackhawk cockpit when you're healthy. Mm-hmm. With those injuries, there's no way. So I just thought, I'm just going to fight it out from the cockpit.
I did not recall that your co-pilot had made it, but they didn't survive. Am I correct?
Well, they were killed in a firefight.
Yeah, they're all killed in the firefight. Yeah, I remember that now. All right, you're still stuck in the cockpit. I remember, I'm assuming it was when I read it, that you had a kind of an off the books weapon. Didn't you have an MP5 or something like that? Mm-hmm. Was that standard issue, or was that
for us?
Yeah, it was. Okay.
Yeah, we used the MP5. They don't use it anymore, I don't think. But that was our. We had an M9 pistol and an MP5.
So you wound up having to engage targets yourself while you're on the ground in the cockpit?
Actually, not from the cockpit. That's one area where Blackhawk Down deviates from what actually happened. I mean, I did consult a little bit on the movie, but really not much. I guess if they're going to exaggerate something and make you look better than you actually were, that's a good thing. But yeah, they have me, blasting away from the cockpit. It was amazing how quickly Gary Gordon and Randy Sugart got to the cockpit. There were no Somalis there yet. And that's why I hadn't fired any rounds. I had my MP5. I was ready to go, but nobody had showed up. And then all of a sudden, Gary and Randy are standing next to the cockpit. And I'm like, wow, this is over. There's a rescue force here. Which
is an amazing story in itself. I mean, both of them wound up with the Medal of Honor posthumously. But I recall reading that they both requested 7 times to be put on the ground, knowing full well that there was only going to be 2 of them, and no telling how long till any guys of the Rangers got there.
You're right about all of that. And again, I only know about it secondhand because obviously I'm not on the aircraft with them. But they were told initially no, and eventually convinced the leadership that if they were not let in, we were lost. And you don't know what's in the mind of someone else, but they had to know, hey, this is going to be dicey at a minimum, because it took 8 hours for another American to get to our crash site.
Yeah, which is crazy when you think about the fact that as you were going down, you could see the airfield roughly 2 miles away, and yet it took 8 hours for anybody to get there.
And it's because, well, we were resource constrained, and there were so many things happening. You had 6-1's crash site, you had the convoy, you had the target, now you had my crash site. So really, the commander's got 4 things that he's got to deal with, and he didn't even really have the resources for one.
By the way, I'm going to chase a rabbit real quick. I don't know if you heard this yet, but the whole base renaming thing that happened.
I was going to bring this up
about Gary Gordon.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant solution. And I just read it a couple days ago.
Yeah. For those who don't know, that Fort Gordon was one of the names that nobody knew was apparently tied to a Confederate. I didn't know that Benning was. I didn't know that Rucker was. I just went and trained there, as I'm sure you probably did. But Fort Gordon got renamed to something, but Fort Gordon's getting its name back for your rescuer, Gary Gordon.
Right.
Yeah. That's I think that's pretty. Now we got to find a Fort Shugart somewhere.
Yeah. They might have to create one. Yeah.
What do you recall about Shugart and Gordon being on the ground? I mean, I've read their story separately. I've read it in your book, but give me and the listeners, when they got on the ground and were talking, what were your thoughts? What was the conversation?
It was brief, purely mission focused. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They knew, hey, look, we got to get him out of the cockpit, meaning me, because I'm too vulnerable there. I'm sitting up, basically up off the ground, elevated, and so that was one of the primary things they wanted to get done, is get me out of there, and then essentially, as well as I could, set up a perimeter. Now, the way the geography of this crash site was, there was a wall right to the right. The nose is pointing forward as I'm sitting here, and there's a wall right to the right. Now, it's just a corrugated tin wall, basically, but still, there's no way for someone to access the site from there. So I believe their decision was, we're going to go secure the left side, put me on the right, and that is in fact where the attack primarily came from, was the left side. So I can hear it, and then I could see Somalis onesie twosies. I fired all the rounds in my weapon at the Somalis that tried to come in on the right side, but the bulk of the attack came from the left side.
How long was Shugart and Gordon in the mix? I mean, how long until they were actually taken?
It's hard to say. I know there's an official timeline somewhere. I honestly don't recall. You know, time is so hard to judge when things are in that state of chaos. I would say probably 10 minutes, maybe 15, from the time they showed up to the side of the aircraft to, you know, Gary went down first, and at that point, Randy's almost out of ammunition already. And he came around and he asked me where the crew chief's weapons were, and I told him, and he went in, grabbed one, and then he gave me what I believe was Gary's weapon, which still had rounds in it, because I had fired all the rounds out of my MP5. And then he went around the nose of the bird. He made a quick radio call, and we were told on the radio that a reaction force was en route. Again, cause for a little bit of optimism here. Yeah. And then he went and made his last stand on the other side.
Were 160th aircraft overhead? I mean, were you getting any kind of air cover at all when you were down?
Well, we're not getting any air cover, but that call that he made that call on what we call the fire net, meaning it's a fire support net. So he's talking to attack little birds probably. And I think I recognize the voice of the guy who answered him that said a reaction force is en route. So they're overhead. But again, you're talking 4 targets here, and the commander's got to put
he's got triage
his assets where they can do the most good. And right now, that's the main target and 6-1, because 6-1 was close to the main target. The convoy's too fluid. It's all over the place. And then we are, unfortunately, just a couple guys that, you know, and I don't criticize or fault him for this. He's resource constrained. He's only got so much he can do. We were kind of left on our own.
Left on your own for how long? Do you recall? I mean, do you have a rough timeline of how long you were there?
Well, when Gary and Randy went down, it's 15 minutes. You know, I mean, it's over. They overran the site. Yeah.
Which I'm on the one hand sounds like nothing, but it's also an eternity, I'm sure, when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Let me ask you there, and I'm going to be asking you some questions. Your book is extremely descriptive about some things that happened in those moments immediately after Gary and Randy went down. You talk about the fact that in the movie it shows it. You're there, you're by yourself. The crowd of Somalis finds you, and then somebody knocks you out. Now, in your book, you talked about it in more detail. They were trying to rip your boots off. And then there's this really odd moment where they were stripping your clothes off, and then they almost felt embarrassed, you said, and they kind of put your clothes back on you. Do you recall that moment?
Absolutely. It was very weird. I mean, they're stripping all my stuff off, and of course, you know, one of the issues here is I've got a compound femur fracture, so when they're trying to get my boot off, you know, my youngest played hockey, and when he was a kid, I always tied his skates and took his skates off. And every time I took his skates off, I thought about them trying to take my boot off. Wow. And because you never unlace it enough, right? And it's always going to be hard to get off. Mm. And at some point, my femur goes out the backside of my leg. And I believe it was because they were, again, just pulling on it, trying to get that boot off. And you know, obviously going back and forth, and finally it just punches through the back of my leg. That's the only explanation for when that could have happened in my mind. Maybe it happened later, earlier, I'm not sure. But anyhow, I can't feel anything at that point anyway. It's just overwhelming pain across the whole body. And then they're trying to get my survival gear off, and I used to make a joke about this. We didn't have regular survival gear that the regular Army units had. We had, you know, we called it ninja gear, and it had buckles on it that are like a water ski vest, right? You have to squeeze
the fast tex
little
buckles.
tangs together to get it to unbuckle. And I always used to say the Somalis don't water ski. So I actually had to help them get that off because, I mean, they're pulling and pulling and pulling. And I'm like, well, all right, I'll just undo the buckle. So I undid the buckle and they got it off. And they got me down to my brown T-shirt, which when you see the interrogation video, you can tell that I've still got that on, and my desert tan trousers. Now, they were going for the trousers, but because it's very humid there and we weren't taking a lot of showers, our flight surgeon said, you're probably better off not wearing underwear because it keeps you a little bit drier. So I was not wearing underwear. And they start taking my trousers off. And again, this is the only explanation I can come up with. They realized that I'm about to be naked and changed their mind and stopped. And in the end, it had probably a benefit in that it provided a little bit of protection from the elements for that now open wound I had on my right leg. Otherwise it had been rubbing in the dirt. So again, just a whole bunch of little weird,
crazy
things like
little
that.
surreal moments like that. Yeah. But one of the worst moments, and you said in your book, you actually had told yourself you were never going to tell that story until the book was actually put together later. You decided to do it. But at one point, one of the Somalis clubbed you with something. And later on, you remembered what it was. Do you mind talking about that?
Well, the reason, and here's the rationale. What happened at the crash site was unimaginable. I mean, I've been in combat before. I've seen people die before. I've been angry at the enemy before. But I never thought humans could do what they did. And I guess I wanted to protect the families of my comrades from knowing about this. So I sort of watered it down a little bit when I first talked about it, not knowing they're seeing bodies dragged through the streets. I didn't know that. I mean, it's on the front page of our newspaper at home. The wife and kids of who we think is not conclusive evidence to indicate that it was one person versus another. There's probably three possibilities. But in their minds, that's dad, or that's my husband. But I didn't know any of that. So I'm sort of trying to keep them from knowing that these horrific things happened. And then I get released and I see all this. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that this is already all out in the public domain. So that's when I decided, well, there's no harm in me telling what actually happened. And it was interesting to me that nobody had questioned it anyway, because if you got butt stroked, which is what I said was originally happened,
right,
with a rifle butt, hard enough to break your eye socket. I can still feel it right here. My eye socket was broken. My nose was broken, but there's no bruise. I mean, you're gonna bruise up if you get hit that hard by a rifle butt, right? And you can see in the interrogation video, there's no bruise.
Right.
But no one ever questioned that. And that's because it wasn't a rifle butt. I mean, and the best I can tell, it was a body part. I mean, it was very heavy and soft, like flesh. And that's why I always thought, well, it's just probably
like the
arm
or leg
of someone. Yeah. I mean, that's the only explanation. But it was, again, hard for me to fathom that these people have turned so much against us. Because you mentioned George Bush earlier.
Yeah.
He visited Somalia before he left office.
Yeah.
And there were parades in the street for our presence there because we had brought stability. We had brought an end to the fighting. We had brought an end to the starvation. And they were big, big fans of the U.S. And here we are 10 months later, and they're doing this to us. I mean, you heard the quote, hearts and minds of the people. You can't lose the hearts and minds of the people any worse than that. I mean, that's as bad as it gets, to go from celebrating the fact that you're here to desecrating the remains of my comrades and cutting people into pieces. I mean, it's just insane.
And desecrating the corpses. I mean, we saw a little bit of that in Baghdad. I mean, I wasn't there. I won't try to portray that I was, but I did have my team sergeant saw the images of, and it was one of his friends from back home hanging from a bridge. There's a different level of depravity, but you witnessed it firsthand, and I got to ask you. So when they clubbed you with the body part, did you know at the time that was what it was, or did you process it and see it later in your mind?
No, I think I suspected that that's what it was, and I can't guarantee 100% that is what it was, but I'm relatively certain that it was. I just remember looking at the guy. I didn't cry out or anything. I just looked at. I probably with, I was incredulous. I just couldn't believe that this could be happening at this point. It's just not something. I guess I grew up watching sort of old school war movies, right, where people still act like humans. They're not at the level that these people were at that point. And I don't know.
Were they all chewing cotton? I mean, was this
Probably.
So, yeah. Yeah, for those who don't know, is it a root or is it a leaf? What is it? But they chew it.
It looks like grass clippings almost, actually. It comes in a little bundle because they brought some. There's a funny story about that in Captivity. And I guess I'll tell it now. So
Go ahead.
So I'm in Captivity, and at this point I've been with the same guy for a few days. Farimbi was his name, and I'm starting to know him a little bit. He's kind of a goofy dude. But he was pretty high up in Adid's organization, and he had been put in charge of my well-being, I'll say, making sure nobody else got me, essentially, or certainly didn't get rescued. And so he had 3 underling guards that sort of supported him. So the 4 of them are, making sure that nobody figures out where I am and that I've got some level of security. And one of them goes off somewhere and comes back and has caught. And they're right in the room with me. And they're dividing it up. And initially they make 4 piles. And then Farimbi says, no. And he points to me like he needs his share, right? So I'm not saying anything. I'm just going to see how this plays out. And now they make 5 piles. So he gives one to each of these 3 underling guys, and they take off. He throws a bundle to me. When the other 3 guys leave the room, I throw my bundle back to him. So he ends up getting a double rack, basically. And he just big old smile on his face. And he ends up, again, I don't know really what the effects of this stuff are, but he ends up with what seemed to be a hangover after he consumed all of this. But it was, I don't want to say I had some kind of grand strategy here, but common sense will tell you if you can build a rapport with somebody who has control over your destiny, that's probably a good thing. I guess this is what people that resist law enforcement don't
He's
understand.
the guy that you said was clean cut and wearing, linen slacks.
No, that's not for him.
That's not him?
That's Abdi.
Okay.
Yeah, he was like the minister of public relations or something. Abdi was, yeah. Okay. But Farimbi's a little bit lower level guy, but basically I won him over. And in fact, once the Red Cross ultimately visits me, they come out describing what they call the reverse Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is when, as a prisoner, you start to sympathize with your captors. They called it the reverse Stockholm Syndrome, where my captors were sympathizing with me.
Oh, okay.
And again, that's probably just one of the things that I had tried to do to build that rapport. Again, I'm trying to buy time, right? If there's a rescue that comes, is Farimbi going to put a gun to my head and pull the trigger immediately, or is he going to think, I've gotten to know this guy a little bit. He's kind of a good guy. Do I really need to do this? Just that 5-second delay maybe saved my life, right? So that's what I'm trying to do.
I remember you said too in the book that your SEER survival, escape, resistance, evasion. Your SEER instructors had told you one of the first rules is don't piss off your captors.
Right.
So, well, the opposite of piss them off is develop some rapport.
Yes.
Yeah. Speaking of which, obviously you're going through it right now. You're going through everything that SEER talks about, with the exception of you can't be mobile to try and escape and evade. But nonetheless, were you able to draw from anything with the SEER course? Was it beneficial?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Tell me how.
100%. I mean, if I had not been to SEER school, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, you learn outside of survival school, big 4, nothing more, right? Name, rank, service number, date of birth, right? That's it. Yeah. That's impossible. We learned that in Vietnam. I mean, because there was no survival school for most of the people who were held in Vietnam. And one of the things that got fixed after that is for certain organizations, there was a survival school stood up. Colonel Nick Rowe was a big advocate of all that. And if you've never read his book, which I read early on in my career, you can't, I mean, you could maybe do it for 15 minutes, but if you're being held for weeks or months or even days, saying nothing but the big 4 and nothing more it doesn't work. Right. So that's all I would have had if I had not gone to survival school. And in survival school, they teach you, okay, here are some things that you can do that go beyond that work like a charm. It's funny you made a mention earlier about how you never really understood warrant officers. Well, actually, that became a benefit for me in Captivity because they're asking me, what rank are you? And I said, I'm a warrant officer. And they're like, what's a warrant officer? You know, obviously they're not saying it quite that well, but you know, a warrant officer, and I tried to do just what you did. I said, Lieutenant, General, Sergeant, warrant officer, right? And I'm trying to show them where I fit. Yeah. In the end, they never got it. But what's happening? We're wasting time. And that's one of the things they teach you to do, right?
Yeah.
Just kill time. If you can kill time and they're not getting to the things that really matter, then you're winning this battle. So, you know, going through these long explanations about what a warrant officer is helping me. In the end, they never got it. And in the letters that they wrote to me after the fact, they called me a colonel. They've settled on the fact.
They wrote you letters after the fact?
Oh yeah, yeah. I should have brought them actually. I wasn't thinking when I left home this morning, but I got a letter from Adid, I got a letter from Farimbi, and I got a letter from the doctor who treated me.
Okay, now I got to chase that rabbit. So what are they asking you for sponsorship?
Well,
they send you birthday greetings? What are they doing?
So Adid's was the typical political letter. Like, you know, I saved your life.
Please remember me favorably.
Yeah. Farimbi's was exactly what I would have thought it was based on building that rapport. He's like, I hope you're doing well. You know, glad that you were reunited with your family, all of that.
Wow. And
it was all written in their native language. And then, but I have both copies. I have the English translation and then the original. And then they asked me if I would become basically an intermediary between them and the American people.
Them personally or them Somalia?
Somalia.
Wow.
And it was too soon. I mean,
yeah,
I just said, there is so much anger, so much pain. I can't stand up and say, you know, these are not bad people. You know, and a lot of them are not bad people. The reality is, it's like any other population. There's bad people, and you know, they're the ones that get the attention, and there's people that are just caught in the middle of it all. And I said,
so you wrote them back?
I actually wrote Farimbi. This is the only one I wrote back, and I basically just said, hey, I appreciate what you did, because you did things for me that I'm not sure I would have done, actually, because I got sick a couple times, and he helped clean me up. But they asked me, and the way they asked me is they set up a meeting with me and an envoy from the Somali government in Nashville. And I went to the unit and I said, hey, these guys are reaching out to me. You know, what do I need to do here? And they said, well, just don't do anything stupid. And I said, am I violating any rules here? And they said, no, not as far as we could tell. I'm like, okay. So I did my typical James Bond thing. I got there early. I got up on a higher level, and I'm watching just to see, you know, how's this all going to play out. And this guy shows up, and he's
just you by yourself?
Yeah, by myself.
All right,
yeah,
wow.
Alone and unafraid in a public place. And this guy shows up, and obviously a Somali. I mean, you know, they have a very unique bone structure. I could spot a Somali pretty much anywhere, and it's just because of, you know, their ancestry and the various cultures that have matured into who they are today. But anyway, he shows up and he's in traditional garb, so that's kind of a help in Nashville. And he sits down at the table, and I wait a few minutes, and I'm looking around, and he's not acting nervous. He's not like looking anywhere. I don't see anybody else that looks suspicious. Yeah. And then I decide, okay, I'll go down there. So I go down there, and this is when he gave me the letters. And then he gave me a T-shirt, which I still have, like the most rudimentary. What is it called when you make T-shirts?
Like screen printing?
Yes, rudimentary screen printing job you've ever seen in your life. That had a picture of a Somali flag and a U.S. flag, and then a Caucasian hand and an African-American hand shaking hands on the front, that this is what they want me to do, right?
It was probably given to them by PSYOPs back in the day.
I guess.
Because we had those same things in Baghdad. We had all the leaflets with the flags and the hands, and it was all the PSYOP stuff.
Yep. And I'm like, okay.
We had T-shirts too.
And he said, was there anything we can do for you? And I said, well, one of the wives asked if there's any way we get a wedding ring back. And I said, I'll put it on you guys. If you get that ring back, that would mean a lot. They never found it. I mean, our stuff just got scattered. In fact, Adid's son ends up wearing my ID tags later on in his career. and he brags about it. I think he said he had my AIM-9 pistol and a couple other things. I mean, they just took all our stuff.
Wow.
There's just no way to get it all back.
Wow. Okay, I had never heard the letter thing.
The letter part. I should have brought him actually. Yeah.
That's some madness right there. That's some brass on their part too, to be honest. I mean, that's
and it's the last time I ever heard from him. I wrote Frimby a letter. He's probably no longer with us because he was a little bit older. I mean, it's been 30 years.
I got to ask you too. I was reviewing your book last night, getting ready for today, and watching a few of your interviews and things, and just kind of refreshing myself on some of the story. And one of the things I did not recall was you said at one point during your captivity that it sounded like the battle with the Rangers was getting really close to where you were. Like it was like you were thinking they were coming to rescue you, but it was really just a battle passing by.
First night. I mean, the battle's still going, because the Battle of Mogadishu starts at about 3:30 in the afternoon. That's when we hit the target, and it doesn't end till the next morning. So that first night, I'm in captivity, and it's probably the convoy. Eventually, we got support from the Pakistanis, the Malaysians, and the 10th Mountain Division.
Right.
They all created a convoy because we didn't have armored vehicles. So we had to borrow the armored vehicles from the Pakistanis and the Malaysians. And that took hours to make all that happen through embassies and everything else, right? And I think that's what passed right by me because I could hear, I'm thinking it's 40 millimeter rounds. You can hear it actually going through the air, and then a fairly big explosion. It could have been RPGs because I've not been around RPGs when they're fired on the ground, so I don't know what they sound like. But I have been around, Mark 19s and 40 millimeters, and kind of know what that sounds like. But it was that type of weapon, and it's the explosions in the walls, and I hear this convoy going by and large volumes of fire, and I'm like, I don't know how they found me, but they found me, and here they come. And then
morale spiked for a few minutes.
Fades away into the darkness.
God Almighty.
Yeah. Kind of.
So you were held for what? 11 days.
Mm-hmm.
11 days. When did you know that you were actually going home? Like what? How did it come? How did you get the word that you're being set free and we're turning you back over to the Americans?
So President Clinton finally did one thing right. He sent Robert Oakley, former ambassador to Somalia, over to settle all this, right? I think when Robert Oakley first came over, not all the remains had been turned over. I was still in captivity, and it was just a mess. And they really respected Robert Oakley.
How about that?
I mean, as soon as his name came on the radar, the whole tone changed. They didn't like the current folks that were in charge. In fact, Admiral Howe, they called him Animal Howe. They didn't like him at all. And I've always said, if we had 1,000 Robert Oakleys in this world, we'd probably have 1,000% less of the problems that we have.
Okay.
Just real solid statesmen that know how to build relationships with our partners and our adversaries, and diffuse situations and not make them worse. That's a skill that probably pretty unique, but he certainly had it. And their whole tone changed. I mean, in fact, they called him a shoot straighter. They said, shoot straighter.
Shoot straighter.
Yeah, and I knew what they meant. And he met with, because he's since passed away, but I met with him 2 or 3 times afterwards. And I hope I'm not getting too far off your question here.
No,
but
you're fine.
He basically said, and he went in without armed security. He went in with one other person, no weapons, to meet with the Somalis. And he said, you got 2 choices. You either let him go unconditionally or you don't. And if you don't, we're going to come find him eventually, and we're going to bring everything we got. And when Robert Oakley said that, the carrier battle group was back. We got fixed-wing aircraft back on the airfield. The AC-130s are back. I think we brought in 10,000 troops. I mean, it was a huge show of force. So we had not only his credibility, but he had a show of force behind him. And the Somalis had damage control to do, because I think one thing that people miss is that, yeah, it's horrible what happened, but it also negatively affected the Somalis from a global perspective. People are looking at them as, these people are
Savages.
Savages, right? Why would we want to do anything other than eliminate them? And so they knew they had damage control to do. So they're smart people. They understand the politics of all this. They understand how to control the media, all these things that we probably don't give them enough credit for. They realize it's in our best interest to let him go. And they did within 48 hours of that meeting with Robert Oakley. I didn't really, another thing they teach you in school is don't get your hopes up too high because it's really easy for things to fall apart. Yeah. And then emotionally,
you're not home till you're home.
You're devastated. Yeah. So I the rumbling started happening that, hey, I'm going to get released, but I just it's another day. I just got to get through another day. And I was actually sleeping when this Nigerian prisoner was brought in to my room, and that dude was happy. I mean, I think he had been like chained to a wall for a long period of time because he was not injured. And he obviously got word that he was being released as well. And then a Red Cross doctor came in, and when I think I finally thought this is probably real is when he gave me the morphine, because he had morphine. And up to that point, I'd been all they had was aspirin. They had nothing else. And at that point, I realized, okay, if they're giving me morphine, that something probably is going to happen. And then it was bizarre. All I can think of is Coming to America, Eddie Murphy. These three dignitaries from Kenya, somewhere else, all come in with their traditional garb. They're drinking tea in the room, celebrating this release. And then they show up with a litter, put me on it, and take me out in the street. And the media is already all out there. That's why it was all broadcast live on TV. They already got the word that, hey, he's being released, and they're out there filming the whole thing.
That is a wild story. And the details of it are they still pretty fresh?
Yeah. I mean,
you're
I don't volunteer to talk about it, but if I'm asked to talk about it, I talk about it. And so that's been about 1,000 times. And so I'm sure there's a few things that I'm probably losing focus on, but I think I pretty much remember all of it.
There was a scene in the movie with a little bird flying overhead while you're still in captivity, broadcasting over a loudspeaker, "Mike Durant, we will not leave you behind." Was that accurate?
It's accurate in that I heard it. That's what they said, but it wasn't a little bird. It was a Blackhawk.
Okay.
And the voice was actually a good friend of mine, Dan Gelada, who we're still pretty close. I'm his daughter's godfather, actually. He was the SOAR bird shot down, and it was his voice, and I still got it. I get a chill every time I think of that. I mean, this has just been a horrible experience at many levels, and you hear your friend calling to you from the sky. I mean, just incredibly emotional.
I would say the Somalis heard it too.
Oh, they did.
Yeah,
they absolutely did. And then music. I mean, they were playing music. There's a tactical purpose to what they were doing that I won't get into, but it wasn't just for entertainment value. And I heard the music as well.
How about that?
Yeah.
With a certain song?
Well, yeah. And I'm not sure I'm 100% right on this, but I went with Hell's Bells because I think that is the song that I heard. And a funny story, again, I don't want to keep going down these rabbit holes, but we're finishing the book, and there's a lot to finishing a book. And it's primarily getting all the pages right so the chapters end up in the correct locations. It's more to it than the average person would think. You jump forward and back
from other missions too in the book.
Yeah, which again, that's a Tom Clancy thing, which I thought was kind of cool, and that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we're about to go to publication, and they say, "Hey, we need the rights to Hell's Bells because we got lyrics from Hell's Bells in the book." And I said, "Well, how am I going to get that?" And they said, "Well, we've tried to contact AC/DC's lawyer, and he's not responding. Will you call him?" So I call him, and I'll never forget this guy's name. Handworker is his name.
Stop it.
That's his name.
He got beat up a lot as a kid.
So maybe you got to give him a little bit of latitude on his response. And I said, "Mr. Handworker, my name is Mike Durant. I'm writing a book," and he says, cuts me off. "Don't call me again." Click. And I experienced some of that in the campaign, by the way, when I tried to do fundraising, because you never know who you're calling. You could be calling somebody who's in the other guy's camp. It sucks. I hated it. That was the second worst thing about the whole campaign thing. But anyway, so I called the publisher. I said, "Hey," he hung up on me, and he told me not to call him again. "I don't think this is going to work." And they said, "All right, well, we got to pull the lyrics." So then that changes the formatting. Why I got into all this is now the pages all shift, right? So, but they're going to do it. Again, this sounds like it's impossible, but I'm actually at Target in the checkout line, and my cell phone rings. Answer the phone, Mike. Yeah, this is Mike. He says, well, I just want you to know that me and the boys are big fans of the military. And
it's a hand worker.
And no,
no,
it's not hand worker. He says, yeah, you can use our lyrics.
Oh,
we found your letter. Apparently, the publishing company had sent a letter to the band, and the lawyer put it in the green room. It was sitting there while they were waiting to go out on stage, and Brian Johnson read it. And I'm now on the phone with Brian Johnson, who gives me permission to use the lyrics. And I said, Brian, I know this is a little bit of trouble, but could you send me an email so we have some documentation here? So he sends me an email that says the same thing a few minutes later. I get on the phone to the publisher, and I said, you're not going to believe this, but Brian Johnson just called me. We're good to go. You don't have to change the book.
That's hilarious. Yeah. What a great story. That's really maybe even better than your captain writing you a letter. Yeah, because I can remember we were staging out for a cordon search or a raid or something in Baghdad, and my battalion commander said, I looked at him and I said, hey, sir, PSYOPs is there. You got a music list? Yeah. And he went, I am partial to AC/DC. So we had to play Back in Black because we were exiting the target site. Yeah. All right, well, tell you what, let me run forward a little bit. I want to ask you real quick before we get into post-military and all that and kind of wrap things up. But the movie, I mean, so I read the book and the movie of Black Hawk Down. Obviously, I think the whole world did. Catapulted your life into, again, a forward presence. Your name went from being all over the headlines during the actual event. Now you're all over the headlines again because the story is kind of gripping the world. I know about the book. Mark Bowden, my understanding is, did a pretty accurate job of researching and writing.
He did.
How was the movie? Was it accurate? And by the way, have you ever watched it yourself?
I've not watched it a lot. I think I've watched it maybe twice. Waited quite a while because I just wasn't sure how I was going to react to it. But I always tell people it's accurate enough, meaning the main thing they do that's not correct is they combine characters. And when you ask them why they do that, it's because in a 2-hour feature film, you can't introduce 25 characters. You have to only introduce a handful of key. Otherwise, people will totally lose the plot. So what you're seeing is maybe some of the ground guys are actually representing the actions of 5 different people, all rolled into one. So the things actually happened, but that guy didn't do all those things. That's a generalization, but that's essentially the biggest deviation from the truth. There's a couple of small things, like they show us playing this word game over the radio between me and Cliff at the beginning of the movie. We didn't do that. I mean, we're not communicating on the radio unless we absolutely have to. It's just standard military practice to not be yakking on the radios. Yeah. And again, they just did that to try to develop this relationship between us, I guess, but nothing really meaningful that is not correct.
But let me ask you this: did the movie do honor to the guys you served with?
I think so. I mean, I can't speak for the ground elements because I know some guys are represented as maybe on the kind of almost goofy side of the house. I'm sure they probably weren't real happy with it, but
Captain Steele and the Rangers was kind of represented as being a hard case that was difficult. I'm sure.
Yeah, and Steele was on my bird. I mean, I knew him. Yeah. I knew him pretty well, and I've seen him since. I haven't seen him in a while, but little known fact that he was actually a guard at Georgia when Herschel Walker was running back.
Oh, kidding.
Yeah, big dude.
He would have to be.
Yeah. He wore his rings, actually. Not in combat, but in the times that I met with him after the fact, because they were SEC. I think he was there when they were national champions as well, I think.
Wow.
Absolutely sure about the SEC. But anyway, I got off track there.
But it did do honor to your guys, you think?
I think so. Certainly the aviation part. Again, I can't speak for the ground. I don't know whether they would say the same thing. Still in touch with a lot of them, but and I've never really heard anyone come out and say, that movie's totally jacked up. Now, what was jacked up is this recent Netflix documentary, which is why I brought these notes. I didn't know how much, if you'd seen it or if you'd want to get into anything on that.
I've not seen it.
The spin they put on that is just, to me, unacceptable. I was pretty upset.
Spin in which way?
They basically make it sound like we're the villains. I mean, not
Oh, okay.
come right out and do that. And really shocked me.
Wait, who made it? Was it Netflix, you said?
Well, it was made for Netflix. So I'm thinking, okay, I mean, it's going to be high quality. They're going to have a good budget. And it, generally speaking, should be pro-U.S. because I think the one thing it does is it tells the political story accurately. Well, the Netflix documentary does not. And
Because there was a lot of politics behind the scenes.
100%, yeah.
I mean, y'all were into mission creep. You were into not being supported. You had the AC-130s that were pulled. You didn't have overhead cover. And then, getting the conventional forces in there for the rescue.
Yep.
We could go all day on the politics of this mission.
And, the problem was I don't have editorial authority on this Netflix piece, right?
Sure.
By the way, it was #1 globally for a week. That's how popular it was. I mean, because I called them afterwards, and the producer guy that I worked with, and I said, hey, man, you guys got this totally wrong. And
So you did call him.
oh, yeah. And I sent them these 4 pages of after action comments about what they got wrong and, how do we fix this? And they said, well, we'll take it up to our management and see, what they want to do. And it was already out of the box. I mean, there was nothing we could do at that point. I tried to convince them, look, if you produce something that maybe goes to another level, that renews interest in the series and you get more viewers, and they didn't bite. So very frustrating because if it did get that much viewing, it didn't help our military. And
When did it come out?
Oh, not that long ago, probably 4 months ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it was probably filmed
Oh, over a year
over
ago.
the last year
Over a year
prior
ago,
to, we could talk politics again on that. You know where I stand, I know where you stand.
Yeah.
But there was so much in the last 4 years, I think, where it almost like there was an effort to make sure the U.S. didn't look good.
Right.
Like we can't possibly let the U.S. look good,
Yep.
even though we're the U.S.
And my comments to them were, in the end, I haven't seen too many Somalis over here to keep any of our people from starving to death.
Wow.
It was pretty upsetting. And, they didn't even mention that Randy and Gary got the Medal of Honor. I mean, it was just, I don't know.
Well, listen, so I think, and I'll just say it from me personally, I think aside from everything you went through, and aside from your career, which was very specialized, very unique, very mission capable, I'm sitting here feeling rather impressed by the fact that you came home from that and didn't retire. You stayed in uniform. In fact, you stayed with the 160th, didn't you?
Right, for 8 more years.
I mean, I think I'll be honest with you. I think that some people would have come home and said, "I did my thing. Go ahead and medically discharge me and give me the paperwork. I'm out of here." So, what was the mental mode for you to say, "No, this is where I'm staying, and I got 8 more years in me"?
It was who I was, and I guess I didn't want that mission already took away my crew, my friends. I didn't want it to take away who I was. And, if I could get back to that same point in my life, which I loved. I mean, I loved what I was doing.
Wow.
It was my Super Bowl. It really was. I mean, when you got Delta Force on your aircraft and you're going in to hit a target that has national significance, I mean, that's pretty freaking cool. And
Half of the earth with the doors open.
And I was getting paid to do it. I mean, it went so far from, that first flight over Mount Washington thinking I could get paid to fly a helicopter to this is how I'm flying this helicopter at this point in my life. And just that it was my identity. And I just wanted it back. I really liked it. Now, because of my back, I was permanently grounded. So, and I always talk about this when I do presentations about that experience. So you're at another fork in your life, right? Do I accept the fact that I'm permanently grounded and get reclassified or get medicaled out or whatever, or do you fight it? And I decided to fight it. And I came up with a strategy that I would run the Marine Corps Marathon 10 months after they took my femur rod out of my leg. So they took the femur rod out in January. Marine Corps Marathon's in October.
So do you have a metal femur, a cadaver femur? What do you have?
No,
Big femur.
well, it's gone now.
Oh.
But they actually, a femur rod, I'm sure you've seen a grounding rod like you put in the field.
Yeah.
That's what a femur rod looks like. It has a weighted thing on the end to pound it in and to pull it out that they screw in.
Yeah.
And it actually goes inside your femur. And there's only 3 screws. There's 2 screws at the bottom to hold the bottom in, and 1 screw that goes into your hip joint up at the top. And you can stand. I mean, as long as your muscles are strong enough, as soon as that femur rod's in, you can stand. I kept it in so that would have been a year. Let me make sure I got the timeline right here. No, because it's 95 is when I ran the race. So it comes out in January 95. Yeah, okay. So it was in for a year. So imagine this piece of metal that's inside your bone, all this bone's growing all around it. There's a big knot where the fracture was. And they got to now drill the top of your femur and attach that weighted thing again and pound this thing out. And they took it out. It took them 8 hours to get it out. I'm told I'm unconscious the whole time. And now I can't walk again because of this trauma on my femur, but I'm going to run the marathon in October. Well, most people thought, no way. And I still remember, and this is why I try to stress to people, I'm not saying anything's possible, but everything's impossible if you don't give it your best, right? And I just said, all right, I'm going to run this race to prove they should let me back on flight status. Yeah. And I still remember the first mile I ran. I still remember the first 8-minute mile. And then summer comes around, and I'm thinking, man, I need more goals because I'm going to run this race, but now I need to have like finish time goals. So I came up with 5 goals. Goal number 1, finish the race. Goal number 2, beat Oprah Winfrey, because Oprah ran the Marine Corps Marathon, the same race in 1994.
Stop it.
1 year before, all right? And she did pretty well, actually. She did a lot better than most people thought. Oh. And then I had actually run the Marine Corps Marathon one time before, so I wanted to beat my previous time. I wanted to beat our commander's time because everybody wants to beat their commander, right? And then my 5th goal was qualify for Boston. Now, if you are a runner and you know qualifying times, qualifying for Boston, you are almost an elite runner. I mean, you got to haul butt. I made 4 out of 5 goals. The only thing I didn't do was qualify for Boston. Okay. But I was crushing it in the first half. And, you know, I'm actually training now today. I ran this morning for the New York Marathon, which I'm running in November. No kidding. And the difference between now and 30 years ago is you have these gel packs that keep you from hitting the wall. The issue back then was we didn't have that stuff. So everybody's hitting the wall.
You were also younger back then.
Well, yeah, unless you're superhuman and train this distance all the time. And that's what happened. I was killing it in the first half. And then at 22 miles, I had nothing left in the tank. And that's because all your calories are gone. Yeah. So now I'm already running with consuming these gel packs. And it's amazing to me how many you're supposed to chew or consume based on what the vendor tells you, like 2 an hour. So anyway, we'll see how that goes.
Of course, if you do what the vendor tells you, you're just buying more from the vendor at that point. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But anyway, I ran it in 3 hours, 37 minutes, which was pretty darn good for a guy who couldn't walk 10 months prior.
And bottom line is Night Stalkers don't quit, right?
There you go. And I got back on flight status, and I stayed on flight status until I retired in 2001.
And you retired on your own steam.
That's right. And it feels a lot better when you can say,
well, by God,
it's my time. I'm ready to go. There's more people here that can take the roles. And I think it was the right time.
Well, I think that's very cool. Listen, we'll spend a few minutes. Life after the Army. How, by the way, of course, you've been to Fort Rucker, Alabama. How'd you wind up in Huntsville, which is my hometown? How did you wind up in Huntsville?
Well, that's Alabama? A perfect segue, because at that retirement point, at 22 years, where do you go?
Yeah.
So I interviewed a couple jobs outside the gate at Fort Campbell, which is where I retired from, and there wasn't anything really all that interesting to me. And then I had a friend who was down here working on Redstone Arsenal and said, hey, there's a lot of opportunity down here, and it's a pretty good town. And
what year did you come here? Right after retirement?
2001. Yeah. Yep. And I came down here to work on a new helicopter that the Army was developing at the time called a Comanche, which is now in a museum and never got built. Yeah. But
nice big paperweight.
Yeah. But it was a great transition for me to go from operator, flight line guy to industry guy. it's kind of hard actually to go straight from one to the other. There's a lot of learning involved, and it was a great opportunity for me to figure it out, and really prepared me to then ultimately start my own company.
But saying you started your own company, Pinnacle was your first company. Okay, and you rode that one until you retired from that, right?
15 years.
What was the specialty, by the way? I know it was still within the aviation industry, but what did you do?
So we settled on telling people to answer this question by saying we did everything in the aviation industry except build the aircraft. And it was true. I mean, training, flight crews, maintenance, logistics, engineering, flight simulators, tech pubs, everything. And we were at our peak almost 700 people if you count our subcontractors.
No kidding.
Yeah. So it was very, very successful. And then, but I mean, it's a grind. You know, again, when I was running the campaign, you know, trying to explain to people, no, I didn't really follow politics all that closely because I'm running a company and it is a grind. I mean, you go from one proposal to the next, and when you got 700 people working for you, there's an issue every moment of the day. Yeah. And that was my focus, and you know, that in my family, and we did really well, and I'm really proud of what we accomplished.
Raised 6 kids.
Yeah. And let me brag on my wife for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, first of all,
were you married during Mogadishu? And
yes,
all that?
but not to Lisa.
Okay.
So she is actually an Army aviator as well.
No kidding.
And outranks me. So she's a major. So when you lay out the, you know, I could put Lisa over here, the sergeant over here, and I'm in the middle. She only spent 8 years in the military and then got out to raise a family. She's a Gold Star wife. Her husband was killed in a Chinook crash.
Wow.
Actually from the 160th. I had met him, but I didn't really know him. But again, it's one of those moments where I could still tell you exactly where I was when I heard that there'd been a Chinook crash, and he was killed. The whole crew was lost in that accident. She was pregnant with our daughter Dina, who's now doing really well. Actually worked for Pinnacle for many years. Was a tremendous employee. And why I want to brag on my wife is not only did she do all that, but she had a friend in high school who had a bad kidney, and she got a cadaver kidney when she was, may have even been still a teenager, and they called it Rudy. I think Rudy was the name of the guy who was killed in this bar shooting, actually, is where the kidney came from.
Okay.
And Rudy functioned fine for 40 years. And then Glow, who's Lisa's friend, started to decline because the kidney was failing, and she was going to have to go on dialysis. And she got on the waiting list.
Wow.
And Lisa stepped up and said, I'll see if I'm a match. And she was a match. And 6 weeks ago today, we were in Pittsburgh, and Lisa got her kidney removed and put in Glow.
That's awesome.
So that Glow is not having to go on dialysis and get
awesome.
Hopefully another 40 years of life.
That's awesome.
And Lisa, today, why I know it's 6 weeks ago today is that she had no heavy lifting until today. And now she can get her riding bike going again and all the things that she likes to do.
You tell her I want to do a podcast with her.
Well, I asked her. She was with me. And she dropped me off in the parking lot. And I said, "Why don't you come on in and we'll get you on?"
Daggum.
It's just not her style. She doesn't like a lot of attention. She's very even keeled. But you know, all of our friends who know about this are just in awe of that sacrifice. And a lot of us say we maybe would do it, you know, but to actually go into the operating room and have them pull an organ out.
That's a step up right there.
It was a big deal. Yeah. But she's doing great, and her friend's doing great.
Well, blessings on her. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I hope to meet her then before y'all leave here today. So let me ask you, you decided, heck, I've done everything else. Why don't I run for the U.S. Senate?
Lost my mind.
Dude, I ran for the state Senate, and I had a 4-county race. You're all over 67 counties, state of Alabama. First foray into politics is U.S. Senate. Yeah. And I mean, you didn't prevail, but you sure made a splash. So the first thing I'm going to ask you, before I even ask you any thoughts on it, is: would you do it again? Would you? If somebody came to you and said, "Hey, Mike, we got this office we want you to run for," would you like draw down on them, or would you say, "I'll consider that"?
Well, I've answered this question many times, especially recently with obviously coach's decision.
Right.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very, very unlikely that I would do anything. And it would take a special set of circumstances. I am by no means an expert, but I think I understand a little bit how it works now, and I understand when the mission is actually unachievable, which, as it turns out, for me it was, and I just didn't know it.
Huh. Any regrets on running?
So, no regrets, because one of the things I went into it with is I didn't want to be sitting on my couch 5 years later saying, "Man, I could have won that." What if? I didn't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
But if I knew what I know now, I wouldn't do it again. Does that make sense?
It does.
I don't regret doing it because I didn't know what I know now.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Yes.
Yeah.
But man, what an eye-opening experience. And unfortunately, I don't have a good taste in my mouth over how it all played out.
You told me that right after the race.
Yeah.
You and I were at a veterans event.
Yeah.
And I said, would you do it again? You said, wrong time to ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Most folks do sit on their couch, though. Most folks do sit on their couch and don't even consider. And by the way, it's got to be a calling. It's got to be a calling to run. It's got to be a calling to serve. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I thought I could make a difference. I thought I was what most people say they want to see, which is not a career politician, someone with life experiences, all those things. I ramp up pretty quick. You don't get into the 160th and succeed there by being an average person.
Nope.
You have to be able to ramp up pretty quick. You don't end up with a business with 700 people in 12 years and make the Inc. 5,000 list 12 times by being an average. I mean, and we started in the worst possible year ever, which was 2008.
Oh,
Everybody
wow.
said, "Why are you doing this? This is a terrible time." So point being, I didn't have a lot of political experience, but I can guarantee I could have figured it out. I mean, there were some very intelligent, capable, good people there, but there's also some that are the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
In fact, there are some who don't deserve the office, and some you look at them and go, "How'd you even get the office?" Yeah. Hey, let me start winding down with you real quick. I mean, my dad has I've got it now. My dad passed away. Agent Orange finally caught up with him, but he had a sign on the wall. His second tour in Vietnam, he was with 11th Cav, and he had a sign on the wall with the 11th Cav patch, and it said, "You've never lived till you've almost died, and for those who have fought for it, life has a flavor the protected will never know." And I think that's true.
I agree.
I think that's absolutely true. It changes your perspective. You've had some amazing life experiences. Are there any lessons learned that you look back on and go, that experience sure did suck, but here's why later on? 'Cause I saw one of your interviews and you said, the crazy thing is Somalia did some things for me that I can't replace.
No question.
Like, what would a lesson learned be?
Well, and again, if I had one thing to pass on to the next generation is don't be afraid to fail. Even in failure, there's success because you've learned something. You've learned, for example, running the race, right? I mean, you could say it was a success for me because now I understand a little bit about how it works, which I knew nothing about before, right? So there is a win there. It kind of pales in comparison to the loss, unfortunately, but there is a win. And I think that was what changed for me. Now, again, I would argue I wasn't a wallflower. If you join the military and go to combat and end up in a special operations unit, you're probably already, I don't want to call myself a type A because I'm not, but you're certainly willing to give things a try. But it took it to another level after Somalia. It's like, man, why am I here? I've already had now 30 more years. There's got to be something I'm here. And if I don't go out there and push the envelope, I'll never figure out. I never will figure out what it is, but I'm losing that opportunity to achieve something that I would have never had the opportunity to achieve had I not survived Somalia.
How about that?
And I think a lot of people suffer from that fear of failure. They don't want to try something because they're too scared that it's just not going to work out. And a lot of times it doesn't. I don't know if you heard about this, but there's a commencement speech by Roger Federer that he did Dartmouth last year. They gave him an honorary degree, and he talks about how many points he lost in his career. It's really interesting. He talks about it in terms of tennis lessons. But he said, I won 80% of my matches. How many points do you think I won? And for those who aren't familiar with tennis, a point is a volley, basically. 54% in his career. So he won 80% of his matches, but only 54. So half the time he played, he lost.
Yeah. Wow.
And he said, you can't dwell on those losses.
Wow.
It's the points behind you. You just got to focus on the next point and win that one. It's really good, actually. I did a little research about him, and he apparently prepped for like 6 months to do that because Dartmouth's obviously, pretty prestigious university, and he doesn't want to get up there and bumble his way through it. But his delivery was really, really good, and some really good lessons in there. It's 25 minutes, I think. So it was really cool.
Well, last question. So you've your kid. How old is your oldest to your youngest? Where the age range right now?
39 down to 21.
Okay. Any of them military, by the way?
No, and my explanation is they were all really young when we left Fort Campbell and came to Huntsville, so they didn't really get exposed to the military.
Yeah.
And they're all more in the technical field. Like, we have a physics major, and we have a Dina, who I mentioned earlier, is an HR specialist and a great one. She's really, really good at it. We got a SharePoint guru who does IT, so it is more the Huntsville kind of expertise, and that's why. And by no means are we disappointed in that. I mean, we want them to do whatever it is that they want to do.
That's exactly right.
And be good at it.
Have they seen the movie?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they all have.
Has there ever been a discussion like, "Oh, Dad, I saw the movie. Wow."
No, not really. They know all my failures and weaknesses. It doesn't change what they think of me.
Yeah. Oh, well, perfect. Well, let me ask you this then in closing, because that may be like a great segue into this. And I've asked this so far for everybody I've interviewed. You're 50 years down the road. At that point, you and I are probably gone, and a grandchild sees this interview. What do you want the takeaway to be? Well,
hopefully at that point, the conclusion will be that I left the world a better place than I found it, which I've tried to do. And also I have represented the unit and our military well, because as we just discussed, there's a lot of negative influences about, our military, certainly with the way Afghanistan ended, Somalia, Vietnam. I mean, there's just, and in terms of how that defines people that are serving in our military, it's an injustice really, because these are great Americans, incredibly capable people that have a very difficult job and make amazing sacrifices. And if I can do anything to represent them as a whole, then that's my mission, because I think it's really, really important. A lot of, you've seen the stats, like post-World War II, there were like 12.5 million people who had served or been associated with the military. Yeah. Today, it's a fraction of that. So most people have no relationship to people who are either in the military or have served before. And there was an initiative a couple of years ago to get out there and tell your story, to try to fix that, to get people to understand the military a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's a real problem. I mean, it really is, and probably ultimately affects recruiting. So make the world a better place, represent the military well, and then really appreciate that. Don't be afraid to fail counsel, because you'll never realize your full potential if you are just too afraid to take a swing at the ball.
Perfect. Mike Durant, appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for being here.
It's always great talking to you.
Absolutely.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Hey, hope you guys enjoyed that one. Listen, check out our YouTube channel. Find us at Right Side Media. We're also on all of our social media platforms, and you can also find us at rightside.media.org. All of our content, just click subscribe, follow, or like, and we'll see you next time on Just Right.